There is a version of the Strangers Trilogy that works on paper. A bleak existential horror experiment that strips away motive, denies catharsis, and forces the audience to sit with violence with no explanation. In theory, that idea is not only valid, it is interesting. In practice, the execution never rises to meet the ambition. It's so easy to dismiss this as throwaway horror, and honestly, I was about to do just that. I never liked this IP to begin with, and I only had watched Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 knowing I was going to go see Chapter 3. It wasn't until a film critic colleague who was at the screening to convince me to search deeper, and I appreciate him challenging me. I want to start here because I think it matters. I respect what these movies are trying to do. The three Stranger films are not accidents. They are not confused about their intent. They are reaching for something specific, something bleak, something uncomfortable. They are aiming for existential horror. Not jump scares, not mythology, not empowerment. They are trying to sit in the idea that violence does not need meaning and that survival does not come with clarity. That is a legitimate idea. And across Strangers Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, what you are really watching is not a plot so much as a progression of exposure. Chapter 1 is denial, Chapter 2 is normalization, and Chapter 3 is acceptance. The films are not asking who these people are or why they do what they do. They are asking what happens to someone who has to live inside that reality long enough for it to feel normal. And that is where the existential horror lives. Not in the masks, not in the violence, but in the idea that meaning never arrives to explain any of it. And I think that part is real, and I think that part is intentional, and I think that part is worth engaging. Where it gets interesting and uncomfortable is when you look at this hero's journey across the trilogy. Because this is not a journey toward justice or growth, it is a journey towards adaptation, toward internalizing a broken system and learning how to exist inside it. That is a form of radicalization, not political, not ideological, but psychological. The character does not become stronger because they find truth. They become stronger because they stop expecting it. The world teaches them its rules through repetition, not explanation. And over time, the character adjusts. That is not a stretch. That is what the structure supports. And I think the idea is smart. But here's the problem. The films themselves do not work hard enough to earn that reading. This trilogy was shot fast. All three films together out of sequence like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. And this was a tight schedule of 55 days with a strict budget. About $8.5 million per film when it all settled. That is not a flaw by default, and limitations can sharpen filmmaking, but only if the craft rises to meet the concept. Here it doesn't. Scenes repeat without deepening. Characters feel like placeholders instead of people shaped by pressure. The blocking is functional, and the tension relies on familiarity rather than construction. You can feel the machinery of the franchise at work. Beats land because they are expected to, not because they are inevitable. And that matters more in existential horror than almost any other genre. If you are going to deny catharsis, the atmosphere has to carry the weight. And if you are going to repeat ideas, each repetition has to cut deeper. If you are going to strip meaning away, the filmmaking has to feel exact and deliberate. Instead, these films often feel rushed. And that undercuts everything that they're trying to say, which brings me to the most disappointing part of all of this. Director Renny Harlin. I liked Renny Harlin. I still do, honestly. He's not some random hire. This is a filmmaker who shaped my understanding of tension when I was younger. He directed Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master, Die Hard 2, The Long Kiss Goodnight, and yes, Cutthroat Island, which everyone loves to dunk on, but even that movie had ambition. But the moment that locked him in, for me, was Cliffhanger. That opening sequence, that wire, the height, the helplessness, I remember being completely pulled in. That was one of the first times a movie made me physically tense. He knew how to put you on the edge. That is why this trilogy stings, because the filmmaker who once understood how to construct tension now delivers films that feel content to coast on brand recognition. This feels less like a director wrestling with material and more like a professional executing a job. I respect the experiment, I respect the business model, I respect the attempt to build something lean and scalable, but when a movie about existential dread feels mechanically produced, the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. The films want to say that meaning is an illusion, but the filmmaking feels indifferent. And that is where the whole thing collapses. You can aim for nihilism, you can deny resolution, you can reject comfort, but you cannot do it on autopilot, because when the craft stops caring, the audience does too. And that's why these movies are such a misfire for me. Not because the ideas are empty, but because the execution does not rise to meet them. And that, honestly, is more disappointing than any films that have nothing to say at all. I appreciate you going on this film journey with me, and as always, be real.
Why are you doing this to us? Because you're here.